Okay, requesting written assertion and representations from service organization management. First, service auditor requests a written assertion from management regarding key points about the system controls and effectiveness. Key areas to address, you have system design. The system is designed and implemented following the description criteria. For example, say cloud provider assess that their platform is built to meet the agreed upon scrutiny as well or security as well as availability criteria, right? First, when talking about control suitability, we want to like confirm and say that controls are well designed to ensure service commitment and system requirements are met. For example, say a company confirms that their encryption controls are designed to prevent unauthorized access. What about control effectiveness as pertaining to the type 2 report? Control operated effectively throughout reviewed period. Say the organization assessed that its firewalls consistently block unauthorized access, supporting security goals. Then, what of role of the service organization in this case? The service auditor ensures management assertion are reasonable and consistent. If management's written assertion lacks a reasonable basis, the auditor might discuss concern with management as we have discussed already. But in a situation where management refuses to provide an assertion or even address those concerns, then the auditors have the right to decline or withdraw from that engagement. As an example, imagine a company that fails to provide a written assertion about their security controls. The auditor will either request further clarification or, if needed, discontinue the audit altogether. But what of self-service organization consideration? If the service organization uses self-service organization, that's their own vendor, the self-service management must also provide a written assertion if it is an inclusive method, and we know why we are making this statement. But in a situation where they refuse, then the self-service organization cannot go with inclusive method, and they have to go or switch to a keep-out method. I remember this can happen while that assessment is going on, but it can never happen once it has been closed, right? And that's where is a sub-service organization willing to cooperate with the service organization? Are they willing to provide that assertion? Do they want their control to be assessed? If yes, then the auditors will have to do that and also include it as an inclusive method, right? Management representation and engagement and at engagement conclusion. Um, Written representation. At the end of the engagement, service organization management must provide written presentation. This presents the final assurance regarding the service or system design, operation, and control effectiveness. A service provider may issue a representation letter confirming that all the security measures outlined at the beginning of the engagement are being effectively implemented, right? Also, importance of early agreement. Agreement before engagement acceptance. The auditor must ensure that management agrees to provide a written assertion before even starting the engagement, because that's important, right? You don't want to start something and then now, once you've started, the management said, no, they are not doing that, or they are not, they are not being transparent about the scope of their control, what that system does. And again, it just makes stuff complicated. That's why it's important to have this assurance, get this information before you even engage, right? So if management refuses, the auditor may need to withdraw or disclaim their opinion. You get the point? Yeah. So also importance of written engagement, we talk of engagement letter. A written agreement such as engagement letter is necessary to ensure both parties understand the expectation and responsibilities, prevent misinterpretation, and clarifies rules. Say, for example, a service auditor may classify they are not responsible for managing risks that fall under the service organization's scope, right? We talk of key terms to include in the engagement agreement. One, we have objective and scope of engagement. This clearly defines what will be examined and the purpose of the engagement, right? For example, the auditor will review security controls for the service organization cloud service. What of the responsibility of the service auditor? They have to outline the tasks and roles of the auditors. The auditors will evaluate the effectiveness of security control, but will not implement them, right? We don't want to, remember, I'll talk of conflict of interest and independence, right? And they also need to adhere to the ACPA. So engagement will follow ACPA attestation standard. Responsibility of management and engaging party also describe what the management and the engaging party, that's a service organization, are expected to do. Say, for example, management provide access to necessary documents while the auditor conducts assessments. Okay. Also, agreeing on the terms of the engagement, we have inherent limitations. Acknowledgement that there are limits to what can be verified during the engagement. Important. Auditor can't guarantee that all risks has been identified. Only that reasonable step has been taken to manage that. Criteria for management or disclosure. Define what standards or benchmark will be used to evaluate the subject matter, which is very important. For example, the auditor uses SOC 2 criteria to assess security. We also have representation letter, agreement that the service organization will provide a representation letter at the end of the engagement, right? Out of using internal auditors for direct assistance, like you now working, helping your organization to achieve this, right? If internal auditors are involved, then service auditors need prior written consent from management that they can follow the auditor's instruction. Are you that stubborn type, right? Internal auditor must assist in verifying system availability without interference from management. Yeah, if management is handling, like giving that to the auditor for them to do that, internal auditor, then also you don't want to interfere, make sure they are also providing the necessary information or instructions, follow the instructions mandated by the auditors. Additional term, which is optional, the service auditor may also choose to include additional matters. Say, for example, identifying the service organization key service commitment and system requirement. Importance of the engagement letter, risk of misunderstanding. Without a signed engagement letter, the service auditor may question whether both parties are aligned, which could impact the decision to accept or continue the engagement, right? Reason for change in engagement scope. After the engagement agreement is executed, but before the engagement is completed, management may request changes to the scope of the engagement, right? For example, changing the method for evaluating sub-service organizations on inclusive method to keep out method that we discussed, changing the trust service categories or boundaries of the service organization system, discontinuation of a service part or adjustment to the system components covered by the examination. When to agree to change in terms, we have reasonable justifications. And for example, misunderstanding, the original term may have been misunderstood. Again, human effort, it's okay. Yes, it might be misunderstood. Change in need, the informational needs of report users change. System components, new components or extended system boundaries might not be included, right? Irrelevant components or services, certain system parts or services might not longer be relevant. And access issues, the service auditor might or may be unable to access a sub-service organization. As an example, a company initially requested a full system audit, but later only needs a review of its security protocol due to a change in the report users date, like users entity. Still on when a change is unreasonable now. For example of unreasonable changes to exclude critical system portion to avoid negative findings. It's not allowed. Request to alter the scope to avoid a qualified opinion from the auditor. It is still not allowed. Changing the scope to avoid disclosing issues identified with a sub-service organization, right? So agreeing to a change, the service auditor can continue with the engagement if the change is justified. New report, the auditor issues an outdated or updated report reflecting the new scope, but no reference is made to the original engagement terms. These are all very clear, that's why I'm just reading, straight to the point. What of documentation? Changes should be documented in an addendum to the engagement letter. As an example, if the sub-service organization refuses to provide a written assertion, the service auditor documents the change in scope due to the shift from the inclusive method to outcave method. But what of when there's a disagreement on change term? If unable to agree, what happens? Service auditor and management may either continue with the original terms or terminate the engagement if mutual agreement aren't reached or met, right? If neither option is acceptable, the auditor may disclaim an opinion or withdraw from the engagement altogether. Accepting change in the terms of examination. For example, a company initially wants an audit of its entire system, but later requests to exclude certain security components to avoid issues with compliance. This could be an unreasonable request, especially if the auditor believes that excluding those components will prevent a thorough evaluation. So do you see that's an unreasonable request, and that cannot go through? All right, what of changes to the period covered by the examination? Say you want to request for an extension or a modification, what happened? And that's why I said management may request to extend or modify the period covered by an existing type 2 report. Say, for example, a service organization may ask the auditor to extend the period from January 1 to June 30th to January 1 to September, right? So maybe the initial audit period runs from January to June, but they are pleading, can you extend it to September? And we'll see what happens. The auditor needs to assess whether the request first and foremost has reasonable justification, because if there's no reasonable justification, why am I extending it, right? And reasonable justification could be, for example, change in user needs or user needs for information or system components or even service boundaries expanding or contracting, right? So based on the justifiable reason, then of course they can extend that, right? And then we have, for example, no significant change. Say if the service organization processes or control haven't changed significantly, the description may stay the same. Say if the organization controls for data security have remained the same throughout the original as well as the modified period, the auditor might not need to conduct entirely new tests, right? Yes, they can modify it, but again, you don't have to come up with a new test because no change have occurred at all. Then talking about professional judgment, auditor will use professional judgment to determine if additional evidence is requested for the extended modified period. Say, for example, tests from the original period may still be valid for the extended period, but the auditor might need additional checks for the last 3 months. Do you understand? So when you are extending, don't think that they're just going to limit it to their testing period. They can also request additional information or evidence, right? Then, but there are also factors to consider when we are extending or modifying a period. For example, it says that you have a control environment. How stable and secure is the system overall? Talking about risks. What are the risks that might affect the control effectiveness? Talking about previously tested controls. Were the control tested during the original period still relevant for the modified period? Duration of the extended period, a longer extension may require more thorough testing, okay? Then, what of the impact of significant change? Say significant changes to the service organization system. If there were significant changes to the system, such as a switch to a new application processing system, it might not be appropriate to extend the engagement. Example, if a service provider switch from an old CRM system to a new one during the modified period, this could require a separate evaluation. So if you are changing from old to new, you cannot tell me to extend it within that time and tell me to cover everything. And that's why it says it could require a separate evaluation. rather than extending the same examination period, right? So when the engagement might not be appropriate, inappropriate modification, if there are major changes in the service organization system, continuing with the same engagement might be inappropriate. For example, a significant system overhaul, e.g. change in infrastructure or controls during the extended period could also result in unreliable result for the SOC 2 report, right? As an example, a service organization asks to extend a report period. If they haven't made changes to the system or controls, the auditor can likely use the same procedure and test from the original period. But if the organization switched its data encryption system during the extension, the auditor might need additional tests to ensure that the new system functions as expected, right? But talking about management written representation for the extended or modified period, what does it mean? Written representation are needed to confirm management responsibility, right? For the accuracy and completeness of information during the extended or modified period. So if you have told them or you are requested for an extended period or modified period, and that's why they said that you also need to provide a written representation, right? Need to present that way, for that same period. Say management confirms that the control tested during the original period were still effective and that any changes to the system were disclosed. So with that, you need to also have a written form, okay? But what of the timing of the representation letter? The letter should be dated the same as the service auditor's report for the entire extended or modified period. As an example, if the auditor extends the examination period to include September 30th, the representation letters will also dated September 30th, aligning with a new report date. Because imagine I have a report that runs from July to June, and they have an extended report, and then we are having like two different times, then that can be so weird, right? But what's the importance of alignment? Consistency. Remember, you also have entity users. You have the report user that will be going through this report. This ensures that the service auditor's opinion and management confirmation are consistent for the entire period under review. If an auditor tests a cloud provider security measure from January to June and management requests to extend the period to September, the representation letter confirmed the validity of controls for the entire period, that's from January to September, right? Assessing deficiency across different periods. This is going to be a long video, but I just want to put everything together. So talking of the roles and service auditor, the auditor needs to assess any deficiency identified in the original report and corrected during the extended or modified period to understand their overall effect. Similarly, deficiency found in the extended period need to be considered in the final report. For example, if a company discovers a security control failures in January to June, they fix it by August, the auditor must assess the effect of this issue and how it impacts the final report covering the entire period. Right? Reporting material deficiency in original report. Even if a deficiency is corrected in the extended period, it should still be reported for the part of the original report or period where the deficiency extended. For example, a deficiency in data security control identified between January and June, but fixed in August, must be included in the report for the period from January to August, right? Even though it was corrected later. On remediated deficiency, if the deficiency is still present in the original report and hasn't been fixed, auditors should evaluate why it wasn't addressed and how it affects the final opinion, right? Then, using evidence for extended or modified period, the auditor can use relevant evidence from the original period for the extended or modified period, provided the information is still valid. Say, for example, for a report covering April 1 to December 31, the auditor can also request or use evidence from January to August for the period running from April to August, if it's relevant. Remember, we'll talk of that, requesting additional evidence. Say, for example, the auditor combined test result from the original report period and the extended period. For instance, 25 items are tested and 2 issues are identified across both periods. The result from both periods will be reported altogether. So it doesn't matter if it was done during the original period or the extended period, but whatever report, pretty much if you read that report, everything is so transparent and you will see. And as a matter of fact, I'll be documenting or developing a SOC 2 report only for paid students. Reporting and conclusion. The final report will include any deficiency found, even if they were fixed later, to ensure a full understanding of the service organization controls and operation. For example, the auditor reports 2 issues from the 25 items tested and concludes that this exception affects the organization's ability to meet the service commitment or system requirements, right? Evaluating deficiency during the original, extended, or modified period. So a service organization disclosed a flaw in its encryption system earlier in the year, but corrected it by mid-year. The auditor will report this flaw in the period when it occurred, that's January to June, even though the issue was fixed later, and showing a full transparency in the report. Though it was fixed, that would still be documented. I've had situations where I've review and analyze SOC 2 report, maybe a control failed that had to do with access control, maybe unsuccessful logon, or not revoking user privileges when they leave the organization on time. They will tell you during this period they got, based on their sampling method or the sampling testing method carry out, they were able to sample X amount of users, and maybe they realized that this X amount of users account were not reviewed. And then they also went through that extended period, told you, okay, when they did that, okay, it shows that everything was clear, but still they have documented it on the report. So even when you are writing that report as the user entity or the report user, you will definitely understand what they've done, right? That's exactly what we are saying. Then I will now continue with the next video, talking of planning the SOC 2 examination strategy. What does it mean? And with that, I will see you guys in the next video.